Jane, I'd like to start, as I always do, by acknowledging the traditional owners, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. You all hear me all right? Yeah. So I am Aboriginal. Quick little brief about me is I was actually born in Redfern and I was made a ward of the state at a very young age, and actually grew up on the North Shore. I wasn't sure what to talk about. I met Janine. I'd also like to say thanks to Janine for inviting me here. I know Matt down there. I've spoken to a couple of things that Matt's done. Does a great thing called Social Alchemy. I love the name. Yeah, I work at City of Sydney Council in Indigenous Youth Development. So I'll just talk about that program that I coordinate there, and it's called Lights, Camera, Action. And basically it's a Indigenous talent agency. So we work at a very sort of local street level, as it were, being that sort of connection between the kids and the youth or whatever. That's primarily the focus, although if we have a director or casting agent or producer or photographer or whatever wanting 40-year-old work, I'll always work at getting that person for them. But the reason I say it's a youth development initiative is because we also run a few programs in that, so acting workshops, and now we're also moving into the big world of film, television and multimedia. And I'll just say that I'm very I'm very basic when it does come to multimedia. I don't have a MySpace page, I don't have a Facebook, and I am a tweet. I mean, I do have them, but I'm not active on them. So with that big, wide world out there of film and television, multimedia, theatre, what we try and do is work with the kids and give them the realities of what it is to, be asked to go to an audition. We're trying to assist them without letting them get sort of too hurt. There's some of you might have heard a thing called the Aboriginal Employment Strategy, and just talking about Matt, because that's an initiative where they get participants, and personally I sort of, I'm sitting on the fence with the whole strategy of it, because it kind of has a bit of a selective get out clause for Indigenous people, and I think at the end of the day, what we've done as Aboriginal people in this country is we have learnt to adapt for tens of thousands of years. So what I try and promote with whoever I'm working with is, particularly Aboriginal people, is to make that understand that. So what are you going to do now? Just adapt. It doesn't mean forgetting about your culture, it just means learning to adapt to the economic environment and the financial environment and all those sorts of things. So bring everything with you. And that's the reason I also mention that is because part of the focus that I see is self-esteem, self-confidence, pride and all those sorts of things. And I was actually going to ask Rachel earlier about, I've got a bit of an article in there. I am chopping and changing about what I talk about. It's very good because I always say that my speeches are very interactive, because sometimes I forget what I'm talking about. So Rachel, one of these things, there was a really interesting article came out recently by Melissa Sweet. And it was on another lady, Fiona Stanley, and basically it was talking about the effects of the media. And I sort of try and, with Indigenous issues, just with this article in particular, it said that this lady, Fiona, had trawled through a lot of data over the last 20, 30 years, and a lot of the reporting on Indigenous issues was, well, she's got it at 90%, was all negative. And that flow-on effect has an effect on both sides, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, particularly for young people. So I find when I'm dealing with kids in the agency, and I'll be quite frank and upfront with this, particularly when the John Howard election was happening, obviously they were wanting to target every minority group, every group in the country, and the Indigenous group being one of those, of course. And I was finding that I had to get as much information from organisations about what they were trying to do and promote, and let those people, those Indigenous people who were potentially going to be doing this job. Let them know about what it was about. As soon as I mentioned John Howard's name, none of them would do it, of course. And so I've got to find that balance there in that instance. So I love all the technology, I love all that, but at the end of the day, I always do revert back to, you know, there's nothing like the face-to-face. And that's why I sort of love what I do. And I find that, that I am that balance, and I take the positives, and that's why I mentioned at the beginning that I was fostered and made a ward of the state. I was very resentful of, you know, Aboriginal people not being recognised as citizens, you know, before 1967. I was very resentful. I'd never met my Aboriginal mother, she died, you know. So I'm very resentful of those things, but I've changed my focus on the positives in my life. And what we see now, realities, you know, is a lot of people that are dying with this Close the Gap. That's because of the malnutrition in the early days, you know. A famous guy called Michael Riley, you might have heard of him, he was an artist, and he had his artwork built into the, I can never pronounce it, but that museum in France. He had his artwork built in there. He died at 40 or something, you know. Why? Because of malnutrition. So those things, we're paying for them. And I also like to say that, you know, we are all shareholders in the social economy. We've got to get that in our heads, big time. And I really think that the media has got a massive part to play in that. Where's their corporate social responsibility? So I kind of feel in my own little way that I'm addressing that as best I can. One of the other things I'll talk about, let me know, I've got no idea how long ago. There's another thing which is really interesting. I spoke about one of Matt's great innovative talks, is the thing called the Australian Indigenous Minority Supply Council. That, to me, is something that is not a silver bullet, but a really interesting concept. It was basically borrowed from the American concept, which was the National Minority Supply Diversity Council. And that's 30 years old. It's been modelled, it's a business process. It's been modelled in many other countries around the world. Actually, as soon as Janine said that this little event was being held here, I'm one of the 10 Indigenous entrepreneurs that are in the pilot program for AIMSI. And the first meeting that we had was actually in this building just over here in their boardroom. Other than that, I've never been here in my life. But AIMSI is really something interesting. In England, it was used as a social inclusion mechanism. In other countries, every other country, I think Canada being the most recent, it's being used as a business inclusion mechanism process. So the president is a lady called Harriet Michelle, and she came out here in September last year. The federal government here had a big umbrella called the Indigenous Economic Development Strategy. And these guys put in their submission to this, and the funding came through. So AIMSI is born. The chairperson of that is the CEO of, if they're still around, Citibank, are they? Steve Roberts. Steve Roberts. So it's, and then all other board members are Indigenous. It's a not-for-profit setup. Basically, the sustainability from that comes from paying members into the organisation. So what it is, basically, I'll do my best to rattle this off.